Well, Patricia, thank you so much for joining us again. We last had a conversation in January of 2022, and today it is May 23rd, 2022, and we're at the second part of our conversation with Patricia Glenn in the Civil Rights Mediation Oral History Project Revisited. And so thank you for joining us again today, Patricia. I really appreciate your time here your time here, and look forward to chatting with you. So during our last conversation, you gave us an example of a mediation. You highlighted an event where you were called in to mediate at a university. You also talked about some of your typical practices in mediation when you brought people at a table-oriented process, meaning where you sit down, we talk through ground rules or whether or not to have them. I recall you saying something along the lines of, if you're bringing weapons to the conversation, or if you want to overthrow the government, that is not a conversation I'm going to be involved. That conversation isn't for me. And I really appreciate the way you framed that. Today, I want to start the conversation by talking about what I would refer to as work on the street during protest demonstrations, etc. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure.
So were you involved as a conciliator during protests or demonstrations on the street, perhaps facilitating conversations between parties, or working to keep parties safe while they're able to exercise their First Amendment rights? Were you involved in that type of work as a conciliator?
I wasn't, primarily because most of the work that I had done preceded any of the demonstrations. And, I felt that what my real opportunity ought to be to ensure that once the demonstration starts, then people are safe, police, community, whoever. So my efforts were actually before demonstrations.
Okay, so you weren't on the ground during a demonstration trying to intervene or do anything, but you would work in advance of a demonstration potentially. So
yes.
Let's say you knew that a demonstration was scheduled in Gary, Indiana for 2 months from today. Would you then take steps to do proactive work in Gary? What would you do?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because, understanding that if you just show up, then who are the players? What are their positions? Where's the real leadership? Because I think sometimes people would think that the real leadership would be the person who is before the camera, and most of the time that was inaccurate. And so that's why I always felt that the work that you do before a demonstration, before a meeting, etc., is so important, because you get a chance to see personalities. You get a chance to really work on what's your strategy going to be. And then you have a chance, if in fact something would go wrong, then you know exactly who you need to approach, rather than just go there cold and say, I'm from the Department of Justice and I'm here to help you.
Great. So how would you do some of that work? Would it be a similar process to a table-oriented mediation process, or were there different strategies for identifying leaders beyond those who were in front of the video camera?
Well, I think it was a combination of both. I was just thinking that fortunately or unfortunately, when I was posted to New York, Bensonhurst was simmering, because Yusuf Hawkins, of course, was shot, and there was a perception that the police actually were not making much of an effort to find out who had killed him. And so what actually we did hear that there was going to be a demonstration. And what I actually did was to go to Bensonhurst and meet with Reverend Sharpton, who had already assumed the leadership. And actually, Reverend Sharpton that day was with Yusuf Hawkins' father. And so when I approached him on the street, then, to kind of introduce myself and the services, really. Neither of them were really that enthusiastic about us. And so, I really kind of talked about, what the services would be. But I really honestly sensed something that was brewing. And so I had gone to Bensonhurst and I said, but, I think that this march tomorrow, and I was very candid with him. I've received 2 or 3 calls from the police department. And I said, they are concerned that they will not be able to protect you because they don't know how all of your folks are going to get there. Are they coming on the subway? Are they coming in buses, etc.? And so their feeling is that they don't want a bigger problem because they don't have enough staff, enough police. So that's really why I'm here. I said not to take a side, but to really look out for your protection because, we don't want other kinds of incidents when everything is so high. And so he said, where are you? And I told him, I said, I've just gotten here. And I was at a hotel in New York. And I said, here's the information. If you think about it and, you think that we might be helpful, would you call me? And he said, I'll do that. And so around 10 o'clock that night, he called me at the hotel and he said, I checked you out. You are from Mississippi. I said, that's absolutely, correct. And he said, look, this is how people are coming. And he said, that where they were going to get off in the subway. I said, can you give me the approximate times that they're going to, so we really went over kind of his game plan for Bensonhurst. And luckily that next day, that Saturday then, we did not have a problem. There were enough police out. And even though, the community certainly did not welcome all of those protesters, nonetheless, there were no incidents. So maybe that's my idea of community mediation.
No, that's an incredible illustration. When you got that information from the Reverend, did you then convey it to the police? Did you?
Immediately.
Yep.
Immediately.
And do you think he didn't convey that information to the police because he didn't know they needed it, because he didn't trust the police? Or do you know why he didn't convey that information to the police?
He didn't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it. I mean, that was after he had that problem about the girl who had said that she had been attacked. So, Reverend Sharpton, was at that point just did not have the best reputation, particularly with police. And so I think that it was probably on both sides. Police did not, think much of him. He didn't think much of the police.
Fascinating. Okay, so you were trusted because he was able to do this background check, in a half a day, essentially. You were able to get a little bit of trust from him to facilitate this conversation. I recall you had leveraged relationships with other civil rights leaders on occasions to gain entry. For example, the gentleman who was in Chicago and he bought a house in a suburb, you were describing how he sat on his porch. And then he came to another conversation later, and you had a relationship with him, and he called you.
Right.
My
Reverend
sister.
Farrakhan,
That's right. My sister from DOJ or something.
Justice Department. Yes.
That's right. Were there other scenarios where other ways that you were able to gain entry into conversations based on relationships, race, ethnicity, or other challenges to gaining entry into conversations, say with law enforcement?
Well, I think that, and that's really a strong point. This idea that we don't talk enough, I think, when we are really teaching mediation about the race, about the issue of race and ethnicity in when you're having these kinds of meetings. And when I had to go to one of the universities in in New Jersey, and it came up. I mean, I think that we don't think enough about or talk enough about kind of how race is perceived in communities.
Absolutely. In the last conversation, you described how there was a group of Black professors and a group of, I believe, Jewish professors, and how they each had different perceptions of you. One thought, the Black professors thought you were an Uncle Tom. That's the words that he used. Whereas the Jewish professors thought that you were aligned, and you talked about ways that you gained entry in those conversations. That was really dynamic. So, with respect to street or community-oriented processes, did you ever find yourself doing any training, for example, of self-marshaling with protesters?
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was just something that was one always on the agenda if there was a demonstration. We would go in, before, and then actually, talk with the demonstrators and also with the police, because let me say, I think that sometimes that's why we had a hard sell with the police, because we were not seen to be objective. And so, that idea that if you're going to simply, meet with the community and, discuss what you have to do, then you ought to do that same thing with police, not telling them so much what they're going to do, but more so, this is why you're here. This is why we're kind of at this point in history right now, so what will be for, let's just say, what will be the composition of the people of the police who will be, will it be young, old, male, female, so that when they're the community sees police, they see that varied police department the same way that you're going to see that varied community department.
Yeah, so one of the questions with respect to street processes is, if you're working with advocates, say, to provide self-marshaling training, did you see your role as neutral, or did you see your role as a consultant, helping them to make their process more effective? And it sounds like from what you just stated, you would offer similar services, not the same services, but similar services to both sides. Is that to ensure your neutrality and impartiality, or is that for another reason?
Sure. It is to, excuse me, to ensure, because, otherwise you really don't have mediation, because it is supposed to be a neutral process. But if you're only working with one side, then it's not neutral. and it does not provide for either side kind of the growth that you need, because we're going to leave there. You know, CRS is going to leave. And so what are we leaving behind? What tools are we leaving behind to assist them in the days ahead? I mean, the oddest one I ever had was when I had to go work with the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, which was holding a demonstration. And so it, of course, you have to get in another zone for that. But, you know, when we actually, you know, drove up, I mean, you know, you hear the chanting and you see them that they're burning the crosses, and you see everyone who, you know, has on the Klan regalia, you know. And so, you know, you kind of think, can I do this? You know, given what I know, and, you know, et cetera. So I think that it's a way of really saying, am I really going to do this job, or have I just been all this time kind of, as they say, shucking and jiving, you know? And so I actually went in and I met with the Grand Wizard, and it was surreal, because when he came in, he was in full uniform. He took his hood off and sat down, shook my hand. And, you know, I told him what, you know, we did. And he said, I never thought the Department of Justice would look out for me, you know, in my section. I said, no, you know, just as we do this for a community, you're part of the community. And, you know, kind of sat and talked to him, you know, about, do you have a strategy? You know, if this were to, you know, really go awry, you know, what is your strategy? You know, how would you, you know, get out? Have you talked to your folks about this? And it's the same thing I would do anywhere else. And we chatted for about 10, 15 minutes, you know, and I said, well, you know, if you have a problem, we're going to be outside. And the strangest thing, he said, are you driving back today? And I said, yes, sir. Yeah, he said, well, look, why don't you take some donuts and coffee with you, you know? And I said, well, you know, I drink tea, which I do. You know, I said, I drink tea, and we're probably going to get something on the way back, but thank you. You know, I appreciate that. You know, and he said, well, you be careful on the way back. I said, you too. He put his hood back on, went out one door, and I, you know, went out the other door. But my example is just that we ought to have the same service, regardless of how we feel internally.
Incredible illustration, and I appreciate how you're checking in with yourself. Can I perform this service for everyone before you went into that meeting room? In that particular event, so you went over these questions with him. Were there protesters there as well? And did you work with the protesters or with police at that event who were, you know, trying to keep people safe?
There were no protesters. There were no community there were no community protests. I mean, this was not a big rally. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. You know. You know, this was not a you know, a big rally. But mm-hmm. What was surprising was the number of license plates, not from the South, but from Connecticut and Massachusetts. I mean, places where it's kind of odd that you would see Klan, you know, but that was our experience.
Did you ever, when you're doing some of these preparatory meetings before demonstrations or protests, did you ever try to help advocates or demonstrators shift their plans? You were kind of, it sounds like, we talked about it in your prior conversation, you were really testing the reality, just like you described with this person from the Klan. what if something goes wrong? Have you talked to your people? Have you done this? When you were meeting with protesters in advance of demonstrations, were you asking them about, you were asking similar questions? Were you trying to help urge them to shift parade routes or talk to police about demonstration routes, or what did those conversations look like?
Well, I mean, the first question actually ought to have been, have you spoken to the police? Yeah, I mean, really, that really ought to have been, because, excuse me, we were not there to take the place of the police. And I think that's why a lot of times there was animosity for us with the police, because that was the perception. And so, that's why I think it was so important to stress, have you had any discussion, excuse me, with the police? And it's not so much to change what they want to do, but to get them to understand, excuse me, that you're kind of in this together. You may be on different sides, but this is an impact on your community. You live here, the police live here. So, that's why it's important for, to say, have you spoken with the police? A lot of the times the answer would be no.
Right. That was the starting point. What other issues did you go over with demonstrators, if you can recall?
Well, I mean, do you have marshals? What have you trained your marshals to do? Okay, not just, here, what have you trained your marshals to do? Are they going to walk on the outside, so of the demonstration? Because if they're, and we try to explain this so that if there is an incident, you won't be caught in the middle. You will be able on the outside. So then you can help direct. You see, if some, rather than someone trying to look for you, have you really assigned kind of numbers or alphabet so that if there's an incident, then you'll say, well, wait a minute, where's Joe? So that you have, some way, then you see of seeing, are all of my folks accounted for? And that really becomes, important. Where were they? Because what we talked about is, now this should be your vantage point during this demonstration. Mm-hmm. So that if something, and most of the time they didn't have anything, but it's the idea that we're helping them with pre-planning.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, I want to transition to some looking broadly at typical cases, knowing that there are no typical cases at CRS, but really, we're trying to think more broadly about cases. So you've described some roadblocks you encountered, for example, gaining entry into a conversation. You described it in the university context. You described it with Reverend Sharpton a few minutes ago. What other roadblocks did you encounter in your efforts to work with parties effectively? And how did you overcome them?
Well, I think the, excuse me, the greatest roadblock all the time is who wants to be seen as the leadership. And that's, because I think that's the real issue, because a lot of times who was perceived that the issue was someone just very new, so that there was no way to kind of trace in the past what might they have done, what knowledge do they have, what experience do they have. And so, and that's, one of the reasons why these pre-meetings are so important, because you really do need to get a feel for personalities. Because if you don't, then once you actually get to the table and begin it, whether you get in the street and begin it, you have no real way, if something goes wrong, then to be able to get to someone to say, wait a minute, I thought that you were going to do this instead of that, or, this is not what you're going to do on either side, not just on the community, for the police also.
So having those pre-conversations, understanding who wants to be seen as a leader and who the real leaders are as well, not just the person in front of the TV camera, something you mentioned earlier. I know you, given you retired about 15 years ago, perhaps this didn't apply to you, but in the current moment, there are, for example, Black Lives Matter aligned groups might not have formal leaders. They might be leaderless, or they might have informal leaders. How would you work with an organization like that to identify, to overcome the roadblock as you've described it?
Well, I think part of what you'd have to do is a more in-depth analysis with the rest of the people, so that somehow you can kind of, and it's dicey, because what you're really trying to ask someone is, how do you define leadership? You see, and so you're absolutely right. I mean, that's I think been one of the issues with a lot of the new emerging leadership, that I don't know if it's leadership, I don't know kind of what it is sometimes, but you'll get different messages depending on who's speaking. And I think that's, that's really kind of worrisome, and also kind of dangerous, because I think that's the reason that you need to have all those meetings and really kind of say, okay, and really talk to them, because that's what if something goes wrong?
Good. So what other roadblocks did you encounter? The biggest roadblock is who wants to be seen as leadership. What else?
Well, I think once you, partly is always new leadership. Mm-hmm. And that was really one of the things that kind of happened in one of the cases, because new leadership kept on coming to the table. And so, every time that, you'd have that, we'd say, well, I thought that, you did not, this is who you wanted to be at the table. Yeah, but, then, we found someone, and so that becomes a difficulty, because after all, we can't say, then this is all you can have. Well, you can't say it openly, but, so how do you do that? And that's a skill.
And what do you mean when you say you can't say it openly?
Well, I wouldn't say it at an open meeting.
Okay. But in a one-on-one conversation, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, I just wouldn't, because I'm telling you, the first thing that would happen is someone say, DOJ has said we can't have, you see, and that's why I'm saying, I know, no,
and
absolutely.
That connects back to your ground rules, that connects back to you're not reframing what the parties have said, because that philosophy is consistent. Are there any other roadblocks you want to identify?
No, because I think once, once you talk about kind of the idea of distrust, and it stays there. It stays there, and that's why I think it's so important to have all the pre-meetings.
So all of this comes back to trust, the leadership identification, the change in leadership. It all comes back to trust.
Yeah, and how you define what you do. See, because and it's not, and that's why it's the meetings that we have. What is the expectation?
Did you ever encounter pushback from the parties?
All the time.
Yeah. And obviously you described some pushback to gain entry, but to gaining entry and starting conversations, what other pushback did you face?
Well, we don't know you. You're not from this community.
How did you overcome that?
And my response would be, you're absolutely right. See, I think if you acknowledge that, then that kind of takes the sales out of it, because and it's also kind of, well, how much can we push the mediator? What kind of temperament does the mediator have? And we've not really talked about that, but that's really kind of important. That and there are all kind of mediators. There's some kind of mediators who kind of, I'm going to get an agreement. That's a type of mediator, versus the mediator that says, let me try to help this community.
And where would you fall in that line? Were you there for getting the agreement, or were you there for helping the community in long-term change?
No, I excuse me. Believe it or not, I was really never concerned about getting an agreement. I really wasn't. I was really concerned with, I want to leave this community with more skills than they had before I came. Because listen, most of them, and this was important to me now, most of them had never had a chance to sit at a table across from community leadership, the mayor, the police chief, etc., and express what they wanted to happen in their community. And that's really important. So that what most of the time they were accustomed to was someone telling them, this is what we're going to do. And so this idea that you can actually be an equal at this table and help to define the destiny of your community was very important to me.
So so I appreciate you highlighting how participants got to be an equal in how they define their community to move forward. But your goal was to leave that community with more skills than they had. So tell me, why were you mediating and not conducting a skills training to give them the skills that you thought they needed as a collective community?
Well, because I don't think that I was really supposed to make that judgment that they're skillless. Okay. Mm-hmm. What I really was supposed to do is to go there, really try to analyze what's going on in this community. Is it something that falls within our mandate? And if it does, then what are the issues? And how can I help them address their issues? Not address them for them, but how can I help them address them?
So how did you measure the success of your efforts?
If they continued to meet after I was gone.
Hmm. Okay.
That was
Mhm.
that was it. They were still making progress.
So regardless of whether they were meeting formally through a new structure or informally to resolve problems that arose, that would be success from your perspective. Is that right?
Yeah.
And how did you monitor success, or did you?
I did, although most of the time people would still call me. So, still, either to say, I don't think this is going right, or look, we're having a wonderful time, etc. So, still most of the time I was still, and also because a lot of the people were in the NAACP, a lot of them were in the Urban League, which were the big now. You remember the time that I'm talking about. So they were already in, let's say, organizations. And I used to go to a lot of the meetings. The NAACP, I would go, to that, and Urban League, and, and so I would always see people who were always telling me this happened or that happened, or, so that's how.
So how do you work as a conciliator with individuals who demand justice and have no interest or willingness to negotiate? So, for example, some believe that simply by sitting and meeting with a conciliator or a mediator or coming to the table, they're abandoning their advocacy. They're abandoning their commitments to their constituencies. How do you work with those individuals?
Well, just by saying, well, if that's the case, then what else do you have?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that. See, and I think that's that agent of reality. When I really, used to kind of teach mediation. And that was one of the things that I talked about. Are we agents of reality? And part of that would be, no, you don't have to do this because this is a voluntary process. We can't say that you have to do this. Absolutely not. If you don't want to do this, then I can appreciate that. I can understand where you are. But could I just ask you then, how do you see the situation a month from here? Okay.
So I like that. How do you see the situation a month from here, working with the advocates? Any other ideas for working with individuals who demand justice?
Well, I don't know what they're, it's sometimes just getting to say, what's your definition of justice? Because I think that's part of what you have to do. Because sometimes justice is not going to be resolved at this table. So maybe this is not what you need. Great. And that's that idea of going back to, but where do you see yourself a month from here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So how does political polarization of the country, and I know we're in a partisan time when you were at CRS, but perhaps less partisan than now, how did political polarization impact your work?
Well, it didn't impact it as much as I think it would now.
Okay. Can you say more about that?
Well, I think that politics open politics didn't surface the way that it does now. It's just, I think it would be harder now because I think there are more layers than there used to be. I mean, it used to be, here's the police chief, here's the city manager, or here's the governor, or here's the head of this and the head, but I don't think it's the same rawness. There's that rawness now that did not occur before. So I think that again, it's treading lightly as a mediator.
Let's see. What role did the media play in situations you were working in? For example, perhaps the media made it easier for you to do your work, or perhaps the media made it more challenging. How did you navigate the media landscape?
It was easy because we were not allowed to speak to the media. So it really made it really easy.
Mm-hmm. All right.
We deferred all of media to headquarters.
Okay. Let's see. A couple of questions I'm just going to note, and I understand you haven't been at CRS for more than a decade, so no need to respond. But the three questions are: what changes have there been to policing, the criminal justice system, and education that have affected your work? But no need to answer. Those are designed to pick up on changes in the past 2 decades. One question that is applicable though, is how do changes in federal administrations, so you were around from the transition from Clinton to Bush, from Bush to Clinton, and perhaps others, how did those impact your work?
They didn't impact our work a lot. We were always worried about funding.
Yeah,
so, we were a little agency, and, sometimes it's hard to define what we do or what we did. And so I think our biggest issue was, are we going to get funded next year? Because we did not want a lot of publicity. We always said that, we wanted to do this and yet not have people know a lot about us, which are not what you need if you're going to stay viable. So that was, but the idea about civil rights, though, was pretty, was better to deal with than I think now. I think it would be much harder now.
I'm sorry, I don't follow necessarily. Could you say more about that, the idea about civil rights?
Well, because I think with, the banning of books and the different literature now and the language now, I think it might be harder to do some of this, but I have confidence in CRS.
And what were there any strategies? And obviously the work was confidential. We didn't talk to the press, but were there any strategies for highlighting the visibility and the successful efforts of CRS that you were a part of? Not
at our level.
Right.
Now, I know that at headquarters, obviously, but not at our level. Yeah. We were the grunts, so we were the field soldiers, so no.
Doing the work. So, speaking of headquarters, was CRS staffing ever sufficient to meet demands? And if not, did you ever partner with other agencies to catalyze your work and stretch your coverage?
I think in the early days there might have been more staff. Okay, but I don't think that lasted long. But at one time, I think there was more staff. One of the few times with other federal agencies was when there was a spate of, and it's so interesting that I say this, of burning of Black churches in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually did partner with the marshals and with the FBI because they wanted to get into the communities, but they had to use CRS as the entree. So yes, that is one time that I know we did do that.
So you partnered with other federal agencies to help them gain entry. Did you feel neutral in that environment, helping a law enforcement agency gain entry into, I assume, predominantly Black communities in the South?
Well, did they? We did. I mean, but I think it was a learning for the other federal agencies. You see, that we were able to, and people welcomed us into these communities.
So can you describe some of the challenges of helping the other federal agencies gain entry, though? Was there mistrust, or were communities welcoming the law enforcement agencies with open arms?
Not a bit, because I mean, everyone remembered, Mississippi and the situations there. And so there was, what the feeling was, well, the federal government, has not looked out for minorities. That was just it.
Were there other agencies, nonprofits or government organizations that you partnered with during to execute your work at CRS?
Not partnered, no. I mean, certainly we worked with the Urban League. We worked with La Raza, did a lot of work with La Raza.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Urban League, NAACP. But see, those were the major organizations. And so, trying to I can't really even think of any other real organizations, but big, beside those.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, and we would always go to their conferences. We would, always participate on the panels. One of the educational organizations we would work with them. So yeah, there were.
Okay. Would you mind if we just took a quick 5-minute break? So we just talked about partnerships with other entities. Did in your time at CRS, did you ever face pressure from anyone to, quote, stay in your lane from other federal or state officials, whether it's DOJ or someone else? No,
I can't recall that. Now, they may have said it, but I can't recall it.
Okay. Who decides what kinds of cases you took? Did you take those on as a conciliator on your own? Did the regional director decide, national, or some combination thereof?
Combination thereof.
Yeah. Can you say more about that, if you recall?
No.
Okay. No. What? Another question will be difficult to answer. What role did social media play in your work? I assume the answer is none.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We didn't have that when I was there. So.
Right. But another question designed for newer conciliators, frankly, or more recently retired conciliators, is how to combat fake news. But you have always, communities have always faced the problem of what to do about misinformation and misleading information. How did you deal with misinformation or misleading information coming from sources in the communities where you were working?
Well, I guess we didn't even, I don't think that we had as much misinformation. And I think it's really, I'm just thinking about this, that most of the time, there were kind of 2 or 3 ways where we heard about something. And one of them is, of course, we were supposed to read the papers from our particular state, which gave you the information. And at that point, we send it most of the time to headquarters. So we would not really deal with the misinformation. And if we had let's say a mayor or police chief or a community leader, we would primarily put them in contact with our media person and let that person then settle it, which made it a lot easier for us.
Sure. Okay. You, after you left CRS, and Congress passed the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which has expanded the scope of CRS's services beyond race, ethnicity, and national origin. Do you have any reaction to the passage of that and the expansion of the scope of CRS's work?
No, as long as they have enough staff to do it.
Right. Staffing is always certainly always a question. Do you have any advice for navigating the bureaucracy of CRS?
The bureaucracy of CRS or other people and about CRS?
Either is fine. But do you have any advice for folks who are seeking to navigate the bureaucracy of CRS?
Well, I guess I never saw there was really that much bureaucracy, truthfully. We were a small agency. Our mission was clear. We did not seem to have the same issues that some of the, other agencies had had. And so I guess my main thing would be to really follow the process. If you have some questions, call headquarters, or you can call the regional directors who could then give you kind of information.
Great. So you have mentioned a number of colleagues you worked with at CRS, but can you say more about who you learned from in order to do the work well at CRS?
I think everybody, because everyone has at least kind of one skill, that someone else didn't have, or etc. So I think working with everyone, you gain something.
Are there any particular skills that stand out to you that you gained from someone?
Not really.
Okay. You mentioned in our first conversation that Dick Salem recruited you to CRS. And you
Yes.
had, because you were a mediator with EOC, I think, in Chicago, and you had several conversations, and you were really trying to wrap your mind around what CRS did and what you would do as a conciliator at CRS. Can assume your role is reversed, and now I'm in your shoes and you're recruiting me to CRS, and you are Dick Salem. Can you describe to me the work at CRS?
Well, probably a lot more succinctly. Well, I don't know all the titles anymore. I mean, it used to be title, you know, that in conjunction with titles of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that we assist communities who are experiencing difficulty due to various kinds of issues within their community, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be, and see, I'm lost now because I don't know all of them anymore.
No, that's no problem. I just, if you wanted to reflect on those conversations, the question was, I was hoping to elicit a reflection on your conversations with Dick Salem after your career at CRS.
Well, I think that, I didn't have one, but if I had one, I really would have thanked him for the chance to really have so many varied experiences, to, be able to kind of look at that, the Civil Rights Act and really assist communities, to then see how it works for them. That would be my conversation with Dick.
Yeah. What sources, other than the Civil Rights Act and the James Byrd Act, would you advise someone entering this line of work to observe or to learn from in order to become an effective conciliator?
Well, I think that there are just so many books on history that that I think people ought to read. In fact, all I ever did, I mean, poor Miss Ochi, when she was there, I just always talked to her about the fact that we needed to have practitioners. We needed to have people who had written books on civil rights to come in and talk to us, because my fear, particularly for younger people, is that they don't read. And so, if you're not reading, then you don't get the it's not just the history, but you don't get a chance to kind of get all of the parties, all of the different issues that were going on. Why was this so familiar? Why do we need to do this? And I'm still not sure that people do that today. I'm an avid reader, so I'm always, reading something. I guess people get tired of me because I'm always saying, "Listen, did you read this? Did you, And that to me would be something that, for me, before anyone joined CRS, they ought to have a book list. And
what would you put on the top of that book list?
Well, I want to say there's a book called Crossing the Water. um, um, but how the Irish became white. So it would not just be primarily, I'm not just talking about Black books, but I'm just talking about the history of groups in America. And I just think that's important for me. Probably not for anyone else, but it was for me.
Thank you. Crossing the water. I'll keep that in, put that on my reading list. Any other sources you would advise someone entering this line of work to observe or read or engage?
Well, they don't have, it's not the same thing anymore. You see, and because it's kind of the old tired refrain. So it's because the new organizations don't have any new information. They don't have any new ideas. It's just Black Lives Matter. Okay, but where do we go with that? Haven't gone very far with it. And I think that a lot primarily is because they are so young that that's all they know. And that if they've not, really had any studies in race relations, if they've not really looked at that, then that's all they'll ever know. And so as a result, it's hard to keep people it's hard to keep that movement alive.
Okay. Did you ever write any written accounts of any of your work, or because it was confidential, you did not?
No.
Let's see. Let me just go back through my list real quick.
I'm sorry?
I'm just looking at my question list.
Oh, okay.
Quickly. Make sure I had everything I was supposed to. Yeah. So a couple of follow-up questions, and I have a couple of final questions to ask you. In the last oral history, you mentioned two events that you were involved with. One was that here at Ohio State in Columbus, there was a convening of many Big Ten colleges, including the ones in the state up north, Michigan, about what to do about protests after big football games and sporting events. Do you recall anything specific about that conference that stands out in your mind, and could you share it?
Well, I think the thing that came out was that it was kind of a nationwide college phenomenon that I think that Ohio State hosted it because Ohio State had, I think, gotten the brunt of most of the bad publicity, but once other universities came, then I think they found out that it was not isolated just to Ohio State.
Do you recall any specific strategies that came out of that convening for campuses to employ?
Besides trying to not let the kids drink so much,
Okay.
and better training the police and
Okay.
how to handle it.
Okay. The other matter that I want to follow up with that you raised was a specific incident that you were involved with. You said you were involved in Minneapolis after a string of police-involved shootings. I did a little bit of background research since our last meeting. There's a CRS report from 2002 where it kind of gives some context and says there was a mediation that had commenced or something along those lines, and it was anticipated that the mediation would go on for some time. When I reread your oral history, or re-listened to the first part of the oral history, I recall you saying that, mediations from your preference would be to have short mediations, hour-long mediations, because after an hour and a half, folks start repeating themselves regularly. But this mediation that you led in Minneapolis was very different. It involved dozens, if not more than 100 parties. And I believe in December of 2003, you produced through the mediation, the parties agreed to a long agreement that included some 82 action items or something along those lines, and included developing the Minneapolis Police Community Relations Council. Can you tell us more about your recollection of this mediation session and some of the challenges with such a large, working with a large set of stakeholders?
It was just the mediation from hell. That's because it was everything that I kind of said we shouldn't do. And we had, because Wounded Knee, you know about Wounded Knee? Mm-hmm. Well, we had one of the surviving Bellecourt brothers. And so he, every time that we had a session, he would start about what CRS had done wrong during the session. So that he would, have to go into the oral history about Wounded Knee. So even though, I kind of, maybe after the third, or, we kind of say, well, Mr. Bellecourt, that's, really interesting, didn't work. We just went through it. So in the midst of it, then people decided they wanted the Somalis to join. Mm-hmm. Now, the Somali community maybe it's better now, but at that time was a very close-knit community. Didn't have any outreach if you were not Somali. Mm-hmm. Had essentially, so many had come in that they had virtually taken over one of the buildings there. So I don't mean taken over, living. There were so many, so that was one of the challenges. So kind of each time another group wanted to join. I told you it was just a mediation from hell. And trying to curtail it so that it did not last all day. So number of challenges, number of challenges. But eventually, we did get an agreement.
Yeah. And if you want to say more about some of the other challenges, I'd love to hear them. But I know that one of your markers of success that you previously described was having folks meet after the mediation session ended. This agreement created for Police Community Relations Council that kept meeting and was still meeting, I've read, perhaps over a decade later. Do you view that as success, that entity was set up and convened, or is there more nuance to this particular scenario?
Well, I guess it was a success at the time, but I don't think I don't think the police were really into it. I think they just want to stop coming to the meetings. So, I think that, and it's funny because it's ironic, because one of the police who was on the panel subsequently became police chief. And and resigned, as you know, when all of the new stuff started, because there was no way to do anything. And so, and I think that that's kind of one of the real issues, that sometimes sometimes it really looks good, but you wonder, well, is anything really happening from it?
Mm. So you said he resigned when the new stuff started because there was no way to really do anything. What say more about that? You're referring, of course.
Well, no, I'm talking about Floyd, because he was and I think I didn't speak to him, but I think that his idea, because he had filed a charge right after that, he and 4 of his officers, black officers, about conditions within the police department, within Minneapolis Police Department. And so I think that it was, when I was, reading it, I was reflecting, on kind of our conversations, and how he didn't think that really much was going to change in the department. Even though obviously, he became chief. So, and I don't think much has changed.
So this mediation, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. One of the police officers in this mediation eventually became police chief, and eventually resigned from that position as chief after George Floyd was killed. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that police officer also filed a complaint to the Minneapolis Department while you were mediating, or shortly after?
No, after.
Okay. Shortly after mediating about how minority officers, he and some colleagues, were treated within the department. So you felt that it's a little bit that the police agreed to parts of this because they wanted to conclude the mediation session. It did go on for, at one point in time I read 18 months, this mediation. Is that your recollection?
Something like that. Although something like that. It was just horrendous.
So you have challenges that make it horrendous, like having to engage new stakeholders, having someone at the table who's talking about problems with other mediations or other conciliations that take place elsewhere. One article that I read said the community participants brought 120 issues to the table to be resolved. And I'm not sure if that's to the mediation or if that's to the Police Community Relations Council. How do you work through 120 issues as a conciliator?
Very, very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very slowly, and a lot of them are just the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of them were same issue, just reframed, or so. And you see, and I think that that's the dilemma in terms of mediation and the mediator's role.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Say more about that.
Okay, that is the role of the mediator to say, look, this is just too many. Okay. Or to say, well, okay, thanks. I think that we can kind of put these in. You understand? And so at what time, at what point do you then say, folks, I think we have enough issues?
Enough issues to grapple with. That's a great question. And, you know, in your mediation practice, you discussed previously that it is not your practice to reframe the party's language. So if the parties are really talking about one issue in 17 different ways, you're going to let them leave those 17 different ways issue, because that's their framing of those that particular concept. Is that right?
Well, I think I would. I don't want to reframe, but I think we'd have a discussion. Okay, so having a discussion and reframing are not always the same thing.
So the one of the articles that I'm reading is it says that the parties that actually entered into the agreement were the Minneapolis Police Department and Unity Community Mediation. Do you recall Unity Community Mediation? And can you describe what that was?
Not a bit.
Okay. How many, when you were hosting a mediation session, these mediation sessions, do you recall how many individuals were around the table?
Sometimes 30, sometimes 40, sometimes 20. See, part of this, and I mentioned this earlier, but part of this is also what happens with the community. Because remember, a lot of the people have not ever had a chance to sit at a table and do this. Okay, so that's a real dilemma that, does the mediator, in fact, because of the mediation itself, then create new leadership, new skills, right? Okay, and so that's a real dilemma, and that's what when you ask that, that's kind of what occurs. Well, I'll just come and and sit for a little while, and then the next time, oh, I kind of like this. You understand? And so it then becomes from trying to just get information to all of a sudden, no, I really want to be involved in this.
Yeah.
And is that the role of the mediator?
Yeah, good. All good questions. And it sounds like an exceptionally challenging circumstance. You mentioned on the last call that you got calls from Minneapolis 2 years ago in 2020. Do you want to say anything more about those calls?
No, they just, the people just called, and it was really, kind of funny because the guy who was handling Minnesota called me, and he said, hey, guess what? The people who were at the table before want you to come in, and I said, not a chance. Nope. But he told me that a lot of people from there had.
And you're talking about the CRS, the Conciliator rep who's doing work in Minneapolis, called you. Is that right? And said, well, they just wanted to say hi, or why weren't you involved, and et cetera. So I said no. And maybe you need new blood. Seriously, I think that's kind of something maybe that people need to talk about. At what time do you need a new mediator? That's a great question. It's a good question. And how do you know as a mediator or conciliator when it's appropriate for you to step out?
Yes.
Were there any, Any other illustrations from this mediation that you wanted to share?
No.
This mediation.
Mm-mm.
All right. I'll just note this article that I think it's in Minnesota Public Radio article that I was reading. I'll just read you a quote from you. This is your after the mediation. It says, "Certainly as a mediator, I always want to get a written agreement. But also what I want to see happen is relationships change, that people aren't the same people they were 7 months ago when we began this tedious, sometimes very contentious process." That's the end of the short quote in this article, but that is so consistent with what you said today about your goals for a mediation.
Yes.
So I have two last questions for you. First is, are there any questions I should have asked you that I haven't?
Well, I think that, because I don't think everyone's suited to be a mediator. So for you, with your project, then what do you look for? How do you evaluate whether they're going to be successful?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. What qualities would you look for, or would you suggest a mediator should have, Patricia?
Well, obviously patience, which I have so little of, and it's just so always how I do this, because I have so little patience. But certainly patience. But the ability to read people.
Mm.
That's really important.
Your intuition with respect to Reverend Sharpton, as you described earlier, and his just reading his eye contact, his eye signals, and his comfort level in that first conversation that you described earlier. That's an example of how you were successful in doing that.
I think that's something that but that patience, so.
Ability to read people and patience. Anything else that are top qualities you would want in a conciliator?
To know when to shut up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you an example of really why that's important. We had, and I'm just going to give you the example. We had to go to meet with a gentleman, and the guy just kept on talking and talking, and I was watching the superintendent, and he was kind of antsy, and I said, maybe it's time for us to leave. And the person I was with said, "Oh no, we're okay." Well, the next thing that happened was that the superintendent, we were at a school, superintendent arose, put on his coat and his hat, and told us to turn out the lights when we left. So, and that's really true. That's a true story. So the ability to kind of look at a situation. So those would be some of what I would look for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Good. So any other questions I should be asking you?
Well, see, I really don't know in terms of I don't know if what you're doing there is actual mediation, or are you teaching people how to mediate?
Yeah, I'm going to pause for a second. Patricia, so the final question is there anything else that you want to share with me about your experience and work at CRS?
The one thing that, I would say is I really enjoyed it because I was able and I was really blessed with having a staff in headquarters who, if they had a situation and it was kind of antsy, they called me because they knew I like to do various things. And so it gave me a chance to really practice a lot of mediation skills and a lot of situations. And so I just always thank them so much, because I think the gamut from doing death row mediation, which was really interesting, heartbreaking at the same time, to go over to Russia and work there at the university and teach mediation and go and establish mediation centers throughout Russia, to Minnesota, so that I had such a really, really good career, and just was thankful for it.
Can you tell me just a little bit about death row mediation and what that was like? What the issues were that you were mediating?
There were systemic issues that really had to do with inmates and conditions. We were not working on whether or not the people were on death row. That was not it. That had already been decided. So
Sure.
we worked on systemic issues, such as the inmate claimed that he had 25-watt bulbs, and it was infecting. It was bothering his eyes because he was in the cell all the time, and so he had poor eyesight due to that. Mm-hmm. That he was a Muslim, and that the food contained pork. That they put, inmates in there who had mental conditions, and that was against the law to put people with mental institutions in with other inmates. So there were a number of issues, systemic, that impacted that entire system. And so what we actually did was to go on site. And that's what I mean. It was kind of scary. I don't know if I could do that now, because you go and, you can't even have a pencil. And you learn that there is a prison grapevine because they already knew that we were coming.
And what state or what prison, if you can't say, what state were you in?
Wisconsin. But it was as I've said, it was at the same time so sobering, because you see all of these men, and you're thinking, my goodness, what can have gone on, and so. But as I've said, I was just fortunate because I was I guess, if you had an assignment, I'd go. Just that simple, And so I really thanked, CRS for that.
Absolutely. Thank you for delving a little bit more into that prison death row mediation over some of the issues. I can't imagine walking in on death row myself. in doing something like that. A, I don't have the ability, and B, just sobering. It's a good word to use. Well, Patricia, unless there's anything else you want to tell me,
No.
this is the conclusion of our oral history. Once I push pause, I just want to publicly thank you for joining us for 2 sessions. And then when I hit pause, I'll go over some logistics and just let you know what happens next. Okay?
Okay.